Hi, I'm Maria Theohara Silvello-Sows on social media. Welcome to Sober 50's podcast on Organised Style.
One of the things that we see quite a lot of is people who are completely new to sewing and don't even know what the bits of the garment are that they're trying to mend.
That's Mary. Now, Mary and Jeanna have just launched their book called Stitch It, Don't Ditch It. Grab a cuppa to hear how Jeanna and Mary were brought together by none other than Zoe Edwards of Check Your Thread podcast. Jeanna and Mary, thank you for coming onto the podcast today for Sober 50 and on Organised Style podcast.
Yes, thank you for having us. It's wonderful to be here today.
Stitch It, Don't Ditch It is out now in Australia. Congratulations, Jeanna and Mary, for getting together and creating such a great resource for us.
Thank you.
It's very exciting, and it's just been really an interesting process to go through. We're glad that it's finally out here.
The good thing with the book is that you both have a very strong background when it comes to mending, recycling, upcycling, and I think that's reflected in the strength of the book. So, Mary, do you want to talk to us about how the book came about?
Yeah, certainly. I spoke to you previously, Maria, about the Edinburgh Street Stitchers. When I had my 15 minutes of fame around that, with various different bits of press coverage, I had got an email from Quadrille publishers who are part of Penguin Random House to say, would you like to write a book? And I had thought, I would quite like to write a book. Obviously, I've never done anything like that before. And I had certain things going on in my life that meant that I might not necessarily be able to be reliable because I was a carer. I thought I'd really quite like to do it, but I don't really think I can do it on my own. I think I need to do it as part of a team. So I had been thinking about, who could I possibly ask to do it with me? And I had been listening to Zoe Edwards' Check Your Thread podcast, and Jeanna was on talking about the decision-making process when you're tackling a mend. How do you decide how you're going to do it? And as she was talking, I could see algorithms appearing in my head and thinking, my God, she really knows what she's talking about. I thought, I wonder if you can actually send somebody a message on Instagram that you follow to say, do you fancy writing a book and co-authoring with me? And it turns out that you can, and they will. So, that's how it came about.
And Jeanna, what happened from your perspective? Did you get this direct message from Mary on Instagram?
I did. And I'm going to go back just half a step because our story sort of, it runs parallel with, for a little while before we actually finally got together. But following that interview that I did with Zoe for Check Your Thread, she and I had exchanged some emails, and she said, gosh, Jeanna, have you ever thought about writing a book? Because this information seems like really good and it would be, great as a book. And I thought, I wrote her back and I was like, here's all the reasons that I can't do that. I would love to. And I'd been kind of working on book content. I'd made a couple little mending zines in the past, maybe 4 years or so prior to that interview, but there were just various reasons I was like, I wouldn't even know how to go about doing that. And so within a month, saying that, no, it's just not possible for me to write a book, I opened my Instagram messages and had this message from Mary asking if I would want to co-author a book with her. So of course I said yes. I hadn't had any prior writing experience either. So it was very much this journey that we've learned a lot together in the process. And, speaking for myself, I know that this book is a much better book because we wrote it together than it would have been had I tried to do it on my own. It was really an enjoyable process. And I think that, because we kind of were able to collaborate on it and bring our different perspectives, I think we've written something that's very useful and hopefully, gets a lot more people involved in mending.
Mary, how did you feel when Jeanna said yes?
Delighted. I think in my working life, I always worked as part of a team. And the idea of having to do something on my own where all of the responsibility would lie on my shoulders was kind of like, no. So to be able to be doing it together was great. A little bit complicated by the fact that Jeanna was in Spain and I was in Edinburgh in Scotland, the UK. But that's all right. Technology can fix that.
We hadn't met in person until just the end of May this year. So we went through almost a whole year writing this book together, just meeting virtually and exchanging tons and tons of messages and emails. And we didn't know each other at all. We did have a couple kind of preliminary Zoom meetings to just sort of, figure out would we work well together. Yeah, it did turn out to be a good fit. It was a little bit, it was very exciting, but it was also kind of there was a lot of unknowns, not just the book writing. Yes. Yeah. Not just the book writing, but it's like, okay, I'm committing to doing this project with someone that I don't know, but it turns out we have very similar kind of work ethics and approaches to taking this on. So we worked really well together.
And I have to say, Mary, you kept mum about this, because when we recorded your podcast, I'm sure you had that in the back of your mind, because we did talk about another podcast episode.
The publishers had said, keep quiet about it and until the point where they were starting to mention it themselves. They didn't want us to be, I think, tipping off other authors that it might be a good idea. Yes. I don't know. Yeah. I obviously have got no idea how publishing works or that, being completely new to it all. But that was tricky, and they had been quite sort of firm, don't tell anybody. And I'm kind of like everybody I bumped into, I'm writing a book. I absolutely could not keep a lid on it. But I think, in terms of getting out into the whole wide universe, with podcasts, I thought, no, I better just, keep quiet.
I'm sure that you both already know, as soon as I saw that the book was going to come out, I actually messaged Zoe to say, oh, you've got to talk to them. And she's like, I already got them, I already put them together. It's fine. Of course.
Yeah, she's sort of our secret third collaborator in this whole venture.
Yeah. So big hello to Zoe, and thank you for bringing Jeanna and Mary together.
Absolutely.
So when I've had a look at the book, I thought, because I do sewing, I thought it was really good that you've got the planning section, so how to plan your mend. But the book is for people who are real beginners, who haven't mended before. Is that correct?
It's targeted at several different kinds of people, but hopefully from the complete beginner through to, potentially people who do maybe a lot of dressmaking, but they maybe don't do much in the way of mending.
That was our goal. Our key kind of reader was someone who's brand new to hand sewing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not also experienced with machine sewing. And so this book is entirely how to mend garments by hand. So we think that, even though it is directed at beginner sewists, we really feel that there's a lot of tips and tricks that people who are experienced with other types of sewing can take away from this. And I know that people who do dressmaking, you know how fabric works, kind of how you're familiar with fabric as sort of a medium and how to work with it. But it is different when you have it in your two hands as opposed to on a machine. So we think that even that it is there's something in it for anyone who's interested in mending, no matter kind of the level of experience that they have.
With Mary, you've got a lot of experience in with Edinburgh Stitches and also Shrub Co-op in helping people to do the mending. Talk to us about that. Refresh people if they don't already know.
Yeah, that was absolutely invaluable when it came to the process of writing, but I'm currently and have been for 5 years a volunteer with the Shrub Co-op, which is a zero waste charity here in Edinburgh. We had been running twice weekly drop-in garment repair sessions where people come along with a garment that they want to repair and we show them how to and lend them needles and threads. And we also have access to sewing machines. And also, to take that a bit further and get out into the wider community, I started the Edinburgh Street Stitchers group, which is a group of people who go out with a camping chair and a banner on the back that says "Stitch it, don't ditch it." We mend in public and talk to people about the impact in terms of climate and environment of textiles, and how the simple action of repair and wearing your clothes for longer can make a significant difference to, carbon footprints and impact on the world. One of the things that we see quite a lot of is people who are completely new to sewing, and don't even know what the bits of the garment are that they're trying to mend. This bit down here, I want to fix that. Yes, that's a hem. They can't even go and look it up on the internet because they don't know what it's called. Having that kind of knowledge of the difficulties that people who are right at the start of their garment repair journey, I think was really helpful in terms of what we knew we had to include in the book.
And Jeanna, your story?
It's kind of been part of my life for always. I grew up in a rural area in Alaska, and my mom and all of the women in my family, my extended family, always sewed. So I learned all sorts of textile crafts from my family members. And, my mom was always repairing things, repairing clothes, making airplane seat covers, and anything that needed to be done, she would do it. So I kind of grew up immersed in this. And then my dad, likewise. He built our home. It was just very much this sort of this lifestyle, and repairing things was just kind of what you did because you had to do. And so I learned this stuff as a young child, and I've always been interested in textile related things. I got really got started with mending in earnest in 2014, after reading an article by Katrina Rodabaugh about visible mending. And then I started reading everything that I could find about kind of the impacts of the garment industry on social issues, garment workers' rights. That was a big motivator for me for trying to, take this initiative to do, what I can to make my clothes last longer. And then I started teaching some workshops when I was living in the States at that time. That's where I'm from, even though I am living in Spain right now. So I started teaching workshops, and really I did some mending with our mutual aid organization in the city that I was living in at the time, and have always really felt that repairing your clothes is something that should be accessible to anyone who wants to learn. Yeah. So I had the good fortune, when I was teaching workshops, that I was able to partner with some really nice organizations that had, kind of scholarships, pay what you can, payment structures. So I was able to, to get paid, but it was still accessible to people, even if they didn't have the funding to go pay for the cost of a full price workshop. So that's been something that's always been very important to me, is just kind of making sure that this information can get out to people and these skills can get out to people. My life's sort of been in transition for the last 3 years, we'll say. So I don't have kind of a permanent home right now, but where we were living previously here in Spain, started a little community sewing group. And I sort of pushed my mending agenda, not so subtly, into that. And, I wear a lot of mended clothes, try to start conversations in that way. And then if anyone who asks, I try to share that information with them. And my professional background, though, which is, completely unrelated to textiles, is in speech language pathology. So I do have, kind of an education background and background working in healthcare. And so that's really helped me kind of in how I approach teaching mending and teaching repair. And I think when it came to this book, again, thinking about how to kind of break down the steps and what exactly is that process that I go through when I think about okay, I need to repair this. For those of us who are very familiar with textiles, you just sort of know what to do, or whatever your craft is. You sort of just know what to do. You have this intrinsic knowledge. And so being able to kind of articulate that clearly to kind of make that information that is just so intuitive to kind of put that on paper and say, okay, if you're a beginner, where do you have to start? What are your hands doing?
Jeanna and Mary, thinking about who this book is aimed for, did that influence how you laid out the book, and in what way have you developed the book so that it's really useful for people who want to start mending and are trying to think about giving their clothes a longer life?
So our book differs a little bit in as compared to maybe other like craft books or mending books, in that it doesn't have specific projects in it. We really try to guide the reader sort of through understanding textiles in general as sort of the starting foundation. So earlier on in the book, we give the reader information about how to determine what kind of textile they have. Is it woven? Is it knit? What considerations you might need to think about when it comes to mending those specific types of garments or garments made of those textiles. And then we also talk about the specific repair techniques that might be suitable for both the garment and the type of damage. And so the book is sort of laid out in that way. And then the second portion of the book gets into specific types of damage that you might see. We also try to kind of group the repairs based on function of the garment.
Yeah.
So for example, underarm repairs, those might also be similar because of just how the fabric has a gusset and there's various seams going in different directions. That portion of the garment functions similarly to like the crotch of leggings, for example.
Yes.
So even though they're totally different garments, usually they're probably made out of a knit material, a stretchy knit material. And so we try to really guide the readers to think about the properties of the garment, the properties of the damage, and then help them kind of problem solve in the mend in that way, rather than just saying, here's how you would put a patch on the armpit.
We didn't want people to be looking through the book and saying, oh, the repair that I want to do isn't in here, it's not listed, therefore this book is no use to me. What we wanted very much to do was to have a section which enabled people to bypass the step of having to spend years gaining the experience through trial and error, to just be given the instructions about this is what you have to think about, and if it's this, do this, and if it's that, do that. Also give them the understanding as to why. Develop an ability to be able to tackle anything rather than just, what we had included in the book.
I like how you've got a workflow of, okay, if the damage is this, have a look at that. If it's this, yes. If it's a whole decision making as to what I think you were talking about. Jeanna, you were about to say something and I interrupted you.
I just wanted to piggyback off of what Mary was saying about, we're guiding people through how to do kind of a long-lasting repair, a repair that's going to make sense. There are a lot of right ways to repair things. We have, just because we have not included it, a certain repair approach does not mean it's not also right. But what we really try to emphasize is repairs that are going to last a long time, so that the considerations you need to think about for a repair that's going to last a long time, that's not going to tear right on the other side of the patch that you just spent hours sewing in place, or thinking about the kind of material that you want to use when you're doing a repair, so that the mend and the existing fabric around that stays strong.
And I like that you've got mends that are in there saying this could be done at a beginner level or it's an intermediate level. Like you've got an indicator for if someone's new, then they can feel reassured that this is actually a beginner level. So I can tackle that. But if it was more advanced, you'd be sitting there going, I think I need to talk to someone about it.
That was one of the things that we had felt was important, was to show people where are good places to start. And equally, hopefully people won't be put off by tackling something that, if they see that it's going to require more skill, they'll perhaps say, oh, well, I'll leave that until I've mended all of these and then I'll come back to that when I've picked up a few skills.
Yeah, you have a little bit of an idea of what you might be getting yourself into. And if something feels really hard, it might just be because it's harder. It's, it's not just because you don't know what you're doing. There's a whole spectrum of difficulty.
Yeah, but I think that one of the things that both Jeanna and I have seen over the years when we've been running workshops for people who have no idea is that folks are very often really surprised at how easy it is if they get those few little tips that make their life bearable at the beginning. You know, the whole hurdle of how to thread a needle is such a big thing for beginners. And if you can get them able to thread a needle and secure their thread comfortably, that's such a big step for them in terms of their ability to then, you know, tackle more going forward.
And Mary, you mentioned that in your earlier podcast as well about the threading of the needle and the resources to go to if you want to learn how to mend. And this is a really good book that puts together the achievable pieces. And as you said, Jeanna, it's not it doesn't have all of the options, but it's got the options that are achievable for people who are just starting out.
The other thing that we very much wanted to do was to be able to give people the language so that if they were trying to do something, that they would know what to look for if they wanted to go and search the internet, which of course is you know, full of stuff about mending. It's just that you might not be able to find the thing that you're looking for if you don't know how to articulate that.
You know, not everyone learns optimally from reading books. It is really nice to be able to turn to a video or something, and they're two totally different teaching mediums, of course, but like Mary said, we wanted people to be able to look for something besides just how to repair my jeans. You know, throwing that into a search engine. A hole on the knee is going to look different from a hole in the back pocket and from a hole in the crotch. So we wanted them to really, again, have that vocabulary and that language so they can go turn to some of those other different resources that are out there to supplement, you know, what we've been able to include in a book, which is, you know, a lot less than you might think when you're starting off.
And that's a whole other story, because when we were writing the book, they had given us, you know, kind of an approximate word count. And because we had no idea what we were doing, we thought, well, we'll just include all of the bits that we think should be in, you know.
Yeah.
So we wrote it all, and of course it was all in different documents. And then at the end of that, we added up all of the words, and we're absolutely horrified. We were so over our word count. But I think that was also a good thing, because it then meant that we were, you know, paring it all down, making it as simple as possible. And, you know, there were a few bits that got cut out that haven't made the cut. It was a very worthwhile, for us, way of doing it, and hopefully it makes a more straightforward read than it would have been otherwise.
So if I was to buy the book, who would I give it to other than myself? Who else would I give it to?
Good question. I would give it to students when they're going off to university, when they're you know, leaving home, and potentially somebody that could sew on that button for them. You know, so many different types of people who have said, oh, that would be really good, because most of us, I think, who do mend have just built up our skill through trial and error, and that's not necessarily the way to find the easiest ways of doing things. So hopefully ours are easiest ways.
I think other people that this book would be good for is really anyone who's interested in kind of a concrete action that they can take to address like the really big overwhelming issues of climate change, of workers' rights, garment workers' rights, because being able to fix your clothes is something, it's super satisfying. I mean, sometimes it's frustrating. Don't get me wrong. But once you've done it and once you have these skills, you can take a little bit more ownership and agency in, you know, this world of consumption that we just all sort of exist in. So yeah, I would say anyone who's interested in, concerned about human rights issues in terms of garment workers, and certainly their impact on the climate, keep wearing your clothes for longer. It keeps them out of the trash, and it slows down, if you're, you know, repairing your clothes instead of buying new things, that also slows down the need to consume more.
If people are feeling a lot of climate anxiety, or just, you know, general mental health issues, sewing and mending in particular, I don't know why, but mending in particular is so satisfying. It's not just the process of doing it, but it's then also when you're able to wear what you've repaired. It gives you such comfort in a way.
Yes.
Once you've discovered that, suddenly all of the clothes that are in your wardrobe that have been repaired are more valuable to you than the ones that haven't. So it's a real, self-care kind of thing. It's very important from just feeling good about who you are.
I think that also from the perspective of people who do make their own clothes, probably a lot of people who are listening to this podcast. I mean, you've spent hours, you've spent your time, you've spent your money, you've used your resources to make your own garments. And mending is slow. It can be slow. It's usually slower than zipping something through the sewing machine. There's sort of, your brain goes to a little bit of a different place when you're sewing by hand than when you're sewing on a machine. Everything's a little bit slower. A lot of times it's easier to kind of get into these little finicky places on a garment by hand, rather than, you can get in there when you're constructing the garment, and maybe you can kind of deconstruct it to a certain point to do a repair, in kind of a hard to access area. But a lot of times it is easier to get to these little fussy places when you're mending by hand. Even people who are accomplished dressmakers and who make a lot of their clothes, I think that's, shifting a little portion of your creativity over towards mending, where you're not making something entirely new that you then have to maintain and clean and keep up. And am I going to wear it? You're going to wear these clothes because you've already made them and you've worn them to the point where they're starting to get damaged. Mending, and particularly mending by hand, you can kind of add a little bit of
self-expression.
Yeah, you can always change your garments as well using hand mending techniques and make them kind of look different and express yourself in a different way creatively too.
It's been very freeing to go from having to always do an invisible mend to a visible, like you can see the mend. And it's also been freeing to see people who do visible mending on Instagram and looking at the creativity of how they use any craft to create that, whether it's hand stitching, whether it's knitting, whether it's crochet, even lace making, all that sort of thing. Again, as you've both said, it helps people manage with their anxiety. It slows you down and you're not adding to landfill, and you're wearing those clothes again with a second or a third life.
And I think one of the other aspects of mending is if you can get into a group with other people who are mending. I don't know what it is, but when you're all gathered round and all mending and the chat's going round, and it really makes you feel so much part of a community. I don't know whether it's the same, if you were all maybe doing patchwork or making something from the start, but certainly with mending, and everybody's willing to help everybody else, and why don't you think about doing blah blah blah, so it's really very good for kind of building community and for building relationships and making people feel part of some things.
Mary, what you're talking about, that's kind of something that's particular to mending as opposed to other types of sewing gatherings, because that's something that traditionally women in particular throughout history have done, is that people just gather and they sew together. Something that's unique to mending is that there's kind of this problem solving aspect, which really invites to share their knowledge. And exactly. Yeah, you can really collaborate. You can share your knowledge. You can share your information, even virtually. It's definitely, I would always prefer to be in real life with people. I mean, you can share that information and just kind of that community of stitching virtually as well. That problem solving piece.
The problem solving bit and the creativity, it seems to be kind of like two sides, the scientific and the artistic all in one go.
And if you're in a group, you have the conversation and the social interaction. So what more could you want?
Indeed.
To celebrate the book coming out, what, Jeanna and Mary, will you be doing?
Well, first off, we have a launch event, which is on the 30th of July with Toppings Bookshop in Edinburgh, which will be fantastic. And then obviously Jeanna's coming over to Scotland for that launch event, and then we're planning some further events locally around Scotland after that.
So kind of a series of combination of book events and some workshops that are based on kind of the format of the book. It's going to be a whirlwind of 10 days or so that we're trying to pack everything in. while I'm up there.
And I'm really pleased that Mary and Jeanna, that you've been able to come onto the podcast to talk about the book to help with the launch, because it goes out today in Australia, and within the next few weeks it'll be out in the UK and the US. But I'm so glad it's coming out Australia first. And congratulations for getting together and putting the book out, and I wish you both all the best.
Thank you
so
very
much
much
for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been great.
Same here. Thanks. This episode of Sub 50 Podcast on Soul Organised Style was both video and audio produced by me, Maria Theoharis, in my sewing room, with permission of Mary V. Morton and Jeanna Wigger. Illustrations in the video version are by Susie London and Lena Yokoyama. Sound by Knief on YouTube. Stitch It Don't Ditch It is now available in Australia. In the UK it's available on the 31st of July, and in the US it's available on August the 5th. Many thanks for the ongoing support of the podcast Patreon contributors. Their membership each month enables me to create these video and audio podcasts for you for free. You can subscribe to Soul Organised Style Podcast, but with an S, not a Z, on all good podcast apps and on YouTube now with over 800 subscribers. Make sure you go back and listen to our free Sober 50 episodes on Soul Organised Style Podcast. Direct message Sandy and the editors at Sober 50 on Instagram to contribute to their ongoing posts and challenges the team promotes to the community. I look forward to joining you in your sewing room next time. Stay safe, everyone.